Started.
Take it away.
All right. So this is going to be a talk that's split up into three sections. I've got a little bit of blockchain knowledge. I'm sure some of you might be familiar already, but what I'm going to be sharing here is going to give you a little bit of background so you understand where we're coming from. Are you able to see the presentation, Chuck?
Yes, sir. Coming through just fine.
All right, perfect. Then I'll go ahead and get started. So as Chuck very graciously said, I've got a lot of experience in the blockchain space. I run Tarski Technologies, which is a consulting firm focused on product development, especially with blockchain. And I also lecture at UT Dallas, and I'm a board member for the Texas Blockchain Council, which is actually how Chuck and I got connected through LinkedIn. We had known each other before, but this was actually kind of the genesis for this whole talk. So I would be remiss not to tell you exactly what the Texas Blockchain Council is all about. So we are on a mission to promote blockchain technology initiatives and drive growth that benefit member companies and the citizens of Texas. There's been a lot of regulatory activity around blockchain for the past couple of years, but a lot of it has either been at the federal level or in other states like Wyoming that have enacted a lot of blockchain legislation. There have been attempts in the Texas legislature to do so, but they have not yet passed. So this group was formed primarily to push through more blockchain-friendly legislation by working very closely with representatives. We have several allies already in the Texas legislature that are looking to pass some legislation that will make it easier to use blockchain within the state of Texas from both a regulatory perspective as well as an educational one. So that includes educating members of government, providing subject matter expertise, and a network where a lot of blockchain businesses and professionals can collaborate. So we have a large network of people. We meet every month in public meetings where, we kind of talk about what members are up to, what the legislative process looks like. And if you're interested in learning more, we will have another virtual meeting on August 25th at 11 a.m. And if you would like to sign up for that, I'll have a link to the Texas Blockchain Council website at the end of this presentation. And I think there should be some links in the follow-up. So with that being said, let me get more into myself. Why am I here telling you about blockchain, and how did I actually get to the point where I became, I guess, what people are now calling an expert, which still boggles my mind sometimes because it started very simply, pretty much because I wanted to make a buck. So very early in 2012, I started. I was that kid in high school that went to the computer lab every lunch. Messed around with a lot of new programs, played with AutoCAD, played Minecraft, and then eventually I came across something called Bitcoin. And me and a few friends realized that it was something that we could use. It was digital money. We didn't know too much about it, but we did know that our workstations, which were built for AutoCAD and rendering, had some decent graphics cards and they had some decent computation. So we learned that we could run these computers during lunch, connect it to what was called a Bitcoin miner or a Bitcoin mining pool, and we would get this digital currency that was worth something. And it got to the point where we were making decent money at it, to the point where we were doing this every single lunch. So that's where it all started, just, playing around, making a buck. But very quickly, I started to play around with it. I've always had an interest in finance as well as computers and a little bit of history even. And I started to dig into what Bitcoin was about, what it was trying to solve, and I was immediately hooked. I was like, this is fascinating. This is some kind of alternative financial system almost. And I started to get more involved. I started to go to local meetups here in Dallas, Texas. And eventually I learned that other people wanted to get into this space as well, but didn't necessarily have the same IT background. I had grown up with a father that was an IT consultant working from home. So I got to get a lot of hands-on experience early on. So I started to help other people with trying to mine, setting up wallets. And pretty soon I became kind of a go-to freelance consultant in Dallas. And there weren't a lot of us. So it turned into a very viable business at a very young age for me. So by 2013, I was consulting. That's a picture of me on the news, because our whole meetup got on the news at that point, just when people were getting interested in Bitcoin. And I'll tell you why they were getting interested in 2013 later on. But around that time, I started my own cryptocurrency consulting firm. I started to become, essentially this became a full-time job for me because I realized there was both a lot of potential in it and, I started at the right time. And very soon after, I started to learn more about where you could use blockchain beyond just Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And that's where, Ethereum was launched and a lot of other potential initiatives that have led to blockchain becoming far more than just a digital currency today. And so ever since 2015 and onwards, I've really kind of shifted focus to blockchain and not just cryptocurrency, although cryptocurrency is still a big part of it. So I learned to develop smart contracts. I got my computer science degree, and I became a blockchain solutions architect. So I did a lot of solutions at Thomson Reuters, Toyota, Verizon, and then I've also started to lecture at UT Dallas, teaching students how to apply it to financial technology. And I also co-founded Tarski Technologies, which is a firm that focuses on blockchain development for products. So with all that said, let's talk about why we're having this talk and why does blockchain something that a cybersecurity professional want to know about? Well, first of all, it's a #1 skill. Some companies don't even know why they need blockchain, but they seem to think they seem to say that it's the top one. And LinkedIn ranked it as the top hard skill to know in 2020 that companies are looking for. So with cybersecurity already being a very hot field, combining that with blockchain really does, I think, enhance anyone's career to be a very, very sought after candidate, whether you're working freelance or you're working as an employee. Because of those challenges, because blockchain as a new technology, because it's a digital technology, also has cybersecurity challenges. So combining those two really does turn you into a very sought after person. So we'll talk why blockchain needs better cyber awareness and what are the opportunities a security professional can find. We'll cover how blockchain works, some cyber attacks involving blockchain, and some very, very hard lessons that were learned, and what those opportunities are for blockchain savvy professionals. So let's get into a quick blockchain primer. I don't want to spend too much time on this. So if anyone has questions, just put them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. But otherwise, I'm going to try and move through this fairly quickly, assuming a lot of you know how cryptography and some basic stuff in blockchain works, because I'm sure you've heard of it before in certain areas. So first of all, blockchain is primarily there to prevent double spending. That was one of the original goals of Bitcoin and later blockchains. And a double spend attack is an occurrence where someone copies a transaction and then replays that transaction. So for example, if Bob sent Alice a payment, then maybe Alice would be able to replay that, copy it, and then send it to the network again. And there might be no way to stop that if you're not tracking those transactions. So double spend attacks are a real problem in financial systems. Now, the normal way we stop a double spend attack is that we have one party, typically a bank or a payment provider, that maintains a centralized ledger, a list of all the transactions to make sure no one tries to double spend. And this works pretty well. It's worked for the last several decades. However, you do have some issues with this architecture. It has a single point of failure. So if someone goes after those systems and shuts them down, then no one can do payments. You can have hacks. You can have fraud that occurs. If only one party is in control. And most importantly, you have a lack of cooperation. Payment providers and banks are not encouraged to make their systems open and accessible, both for security reasons and because they want to protect their competitive advantage. So it's not something that encourages the same sort of collaboration we see on the internet when it comes to operating systems like Linux or programming languages, or the way that GitHub has fostered a lot of collaboration. Payment systems don't really have that, at least not the kinds that banks are using. So how do we solve that problem? Well, that's where distributed ledgers come in. These allow any participant to access and maintain their own copy of the ledger. If you're familiar with the way BitTorrent works, is a very similar idea. The idea that anyone can hop onto the network, download data, and then share it with other people. That's the same way a blockchain ledger would work, except they're storing transactions. And by removing that centralized party, you don't have a single point of failure. If one or two nodes get taken down, or have some sort of failure, the rest of the network continues to operate just fine. So it makes it very resilient, as well as increasing transparency, since everyone has access to the data. However, this doesn't just solve the problem of double spend attacks. We still need to verify that payments came from the right owner. We still need to reach consensus in the correct ledger, and we need to prevent cheating from occurring. So how do we do this? Well, the essential ingredient is cryptography. And that's one of the reasons that we call cryptocurrencies crypto, because cryptography plays such an important role. I'm sure many of you are familiar with cryptography, and some of you may also be familiar with the other two features that are very critical. One are digital signatures, the idea of having a public key for identification and a private key for authentication. So being able to sign messages with a private key that can be authenticated as belonging to a public key. Which is very important for verifying ownership and that transactions came from the right person. You also have hashing functions, which allow you to create unique fingerprints of data. You can give it any piece of data, and it'll give you a unique hash that can't go the other direction. It's a one-way hash, which is very good to compare data and verify that you're looking at the right piece of information. So both of these can go into a transaction that we see there. We have a signature for Bob, and we have a hash for that transaction, and we can use that to validate transactions and compare them. However, we might have a hard time comparing hundreds or thousands of transactions, even if we hash them individually, because there's still a lot of comparisons we have to do. It's a very computationally complex problem. So this is where something called a Merkle tree becomes essential, which is used in other platforms, but blockchain makes especially critical use of them. So if we wanted to compare a large list of transactions, we can take the hash of all transactions, including the one we're looking at now, and we can hash them together into a tree, where each pair of transactions is a new combined hash. And if we changed B, then E would be changed. And we can continue to do this until there's one hash left called the root hash, which represents all the transactions in that tree. And this is great because now we can verify an entire data set, as well as the individual transactions within it. And if we wanted to change that transaction, then that would invalidate the hash and therefore invalidate the entire tree. So we have this great way of making sure transactions are not tampered with. However, we still need to order the transactions. Merkle trees do not have a concept of ordering. They just know if the data is correct or not. So the way we order it is by using blocks, which allows us to establish which came first. This is kind of similar to the way you might have pages in a ledger book, where one page might represent a day of business or a day of transactions. So the way we create a block in a blockchain is first we take the Merkle root from a list of transactions, and then we would add a timestamp so we know when it occurred. We also want to add a nonce, which is very important for mining. This is kind of like the lock on a block to make sure that it is secure, and we'll talk more about that soon. And then we also include a hash of the previous block, which is the most important part. This is where the chain of the blockchain comes in. So what we then do with this block and this blockchain, and one question comes through: what if transaction participants agree to change the tree? We'll get to that. We will get to that. That's a good question. I'm going to save that for later because there's a perfect example we'll bring up. So now that we have this block, we can actually reference the block that came before it using that previous block hash. And this allows us to keep an order that references what came before as well as what comes after. So just as we referenced the block hash before, the next block will reference the block hash of what we just created. So this allows us to form a chain where all these blocks are linked and so are the transactions. And this is great for enforcing order that cannot be tampered with, that is immutable. And so if we do the same thing we did before and we change a transaction in that list of transactions, then that will invalidate the Merkle root as we saw before. And then most importantly, it will also invalidate the block that comes after. So you cannot change a block that has already been added to the chain without invalidating everything afterwards, which allows us to enforce an immutable order of these transactions. So this is great. We're almost done with kind of what a typical blockchain looks like, but we do need to make sure that the blockchain can't be recomputed, because a computer could recompute all the hashes in a blockchain up until the present day. And by the way, these hashes, these blocks would go all the way back to the Genesis block, which in the case of Bitcoin was 2009. So the way that we would stop someone from recomputing that is requiring a proof of work, which is done by nodes called miners. And they are responsible for putting new transactions into the block. What is a good resource to find more about a Merkle tree? I will find you a good link and send that over. But I would say giving it a Google and the Wikipedia article is a good start. So on mining, what a miner will do is they will try to calculate the nonce in a block. And essentially what they're doing is they're just trying to guess an answer to a hash that will result in a certain set of zeros. So essentially, they're just raw guessing. They're just trying to guess a number that will result in something that is required to validate that block. And it's a very hard math problem. It just takes a certain amount of time to guess. So the more computational power you have, the faster you can guess. And once a miner finds the correct nonce, then they are allowed to add the next block in the chain, including ordering the transactions. In return for this service, miners are typically rewarded with both transaction fees and new coins. In the case of Bitcoin, they get a certain amount of reward every time. And so the supply is steadily increasing, but never at a very high rate. It's always very stable and secure. And so it's also adjusted periodically. So if more miners join the network, then the difficulty will increase accordingly. And so that makes sure that the block time is consistent. In the case of Bitcoin, it's 10 minutes. In the case of Ethereum, it's 15 seconds. And so the true ledger is decided by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work invested in it. And that means that no one could possibly catch up to the true chain, the true ledger, because they would need far more computational power than is available in order to do that. And so this means blockchains are incredibly secure. And the only way you could beat it is if you can take over the network as in 51% of mining power, which it can be very difficult to do, especially if the network has a lot of computational power behind it. It would require so much effort that it might not even be worth the reward of hacking a blockchain. So this is what makes blockchain secure. So any questions on that other than what people have already posted? Because this will be important to know as we go into the rest of this talk. Going once, going twice. All right, let's keep going. And actually, one more thing to wrap up is blockchains are immutable. That's one of the key features that we see. So that means that transactions can't be deleted, they can't be modified or otherwise tampered with once they're added to a block. You can certainly add information that references a past transaction, but you can never override a transaction. It's always going to be there. Hash functions can easily protect the smallest changes, so we have data integrity. So this means it's censorship resistant and it's transparent. These are also verifiable. So transaction rules are guaranteed. You can always make sure that if someone owns Bitcoin, that they are the only ones that can send that Bitcoin to someone else as long as they control a private key. So we can guarantee ownership as well as other enforceable rules that we can potentially program, such as with smart contracts. And they are decentralized. There's no single point of failure, and anyone can participate in the network, run a node, update it, and make sure it's always available and auditable. And this doesn't just apply to the way that the network is run. It also applies to the governance, as in who's deciding what code to run, as well as the open source software. So you get a lot of benefits from that. You get a lot of not just reliability and accessibility, but you get a lot of collaboration because this is an open network everyone can see. And by contributing to that network in terms of development or mining power or anything else like that, you actually have an ecosystem that is cooperative because the way a blockchain is set up incentivizes collaboration rather than competition, at least not competition in terms of creating another blockchain or something like that. It's mainly everyone's contributing to this chain, and the better this chain does, the better everyone will do. So 2 questions to follow up on that. 51% attack, is that realistically achievable by a nation state? I would say it is, but it would require a massive amount of computation or someone taking over existing computation. And I think the only nation state that would be in a situation to execute that attack would be the United States or China. I doubt the United States would ever be able to muster that politically unless they had access to some sort of technology that's not currently available. And this might actually get into the second question, which is how safe is blockchain against quantum computing? I would say it is as safe as any other cryptography out there. Quantum computing has been something that blockchain researchers and developers have been watching. And they have been taking steps to make sure that they can upgrade to new cryptographic schemes if necessary. So I would say it is safe in the extent that as long as quantum computing doesn't make a massive leap forward without anyone finding out, I think blockchain cryptography will always be updated in time for quantum computing to reach the point where it could become a danger. So it's really only if someone secretly discovers a way to do massive quantum computing that can break crypto, just like SHA-256. All right, so with that being said, I will move forward into the fun part, because now we are going to talk about cyber tales in crypto. So we'll go through some examples of how cybersecurity has been very critical and important in the blockchain space and really get into some interesting details. So the first one is the Silk Road. Now, some of you may have already heard of this because it's kind of infamous in the darknet circles. The Silk Road was a darknet market launched in 2011 that ran on Tor. So it was anonymous and very difficult to track users on the site, as well as the site location itself. And the innovative thing about the Silk Road was the fact that it used Bitcoin for payments of illegal goods. And Bitcoin at this time was kind of very new. There weren't a lot of people using Bitcoin outside of hobbyists and people that were the original developers. And they only recently had exchanges that were actually trading it, but it actually started to gain a lot of traction because of the Silk Road and later dark markets that came after it. So what happened is kind of predictable, and I'm sure some of you know, that's the government eventually found out and instigated an investigation and eventually found out who ran it and shut down the site. So you can see that little image there is what a lot of people saw as soon as that happened. And Ross Ulbricht, also known as Dread Pirate Roberts on the site, was arrested and did end up being convicted and went to jail. However, it started something that can't be stopped, and that's the fact that a lot of darknet markets since have been using Bitcoin and continue to be active. And we see other instances of cybercrime using Bitcoin because it can't be shut down, even if a government wants to shut it down, and it can't be stopped. So people can send transactions. People can be, I would say, pseudo-anonymous in terms of they can use account addresses or public keys that aren't associated with the real identity. So it has a lot of advantages for criminals. There are some disadvantages we'll also get into. But the ultimate lesson was Bitcoin and blockchain can and will be used for cybercrime. And this is one of the biggest reasons to know what crypto and blockchain is and how it works, because it's going to be crucial for any kind of anti-money laundering or criminal or basically law enforcement online. So a very good reason to know it just to start as a cybersecurity professional. But let's get into some more examples. Another big thing that occurred, and this is around in 2013 after the Silk Road was shut down, was the Mt. Gox hack. So Mt. Gox was one of the early Bitcoin exchanges. And for those of you who don't know, Mt. Gox actually stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It was originally a trading card site for people to trade Magic the Gathering cards. And eventually it got into Bitcoin and began to focus more on that as soon as the Bitcoin market started to take off, which was really, really funny because it was just a very strange beginning. And then as soon as Bitcoin got popular, Mt. Gox was the biggest one that was there. So they just took off in popularity. And by 2013, they were handling 70% of all Bitcoin trading volume, which is a ton because this is millions upon billions of dollars. Unfortunately, they grew a little too quickly, did not have good security practices, and ended up losing over 850,000 Bitcoins over several months of just losing crypto. And I even had a Mt. Gox account at one point. I got rid of it as soon as I saw some of the horror stories coming out because people knew about this for months, but it kept going up until early 2014 when the site finally collapsed under its own weight with over $450 million worth of Bitcoin gone. And a lot of the users of Mt. Gox at that time lost all of their funds. You can see a protester there who flew to Japan to protest outside their office, and he's facing off with the CEO of Mt. Gox, Mark Capellas, who eventually went to jail for, or rather he was, I think, paroled, but there was a lot of things that went wrong. Mainly the fact that they didn't have good security practices at all. And so the main lesson here is if you don't control your own private keys, you don't control your cryptocurrency account. Because this was not a failing of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, that network, was never hacked. There was never any problem. What occurred here is a lot of people put their funds into a third party, namely Mt. Gox, to trade it for US dollars or Japanese yen or whatever they wanted to purchase it with. And that meant that those private keys were a honeypot that people could get access to, or they could, find other security vulnerabilities to bleed Bitcoin out of the system. So ultimately, blockchains are only secure as the way you store your private key. And so as an individual, that's the way you have to protect yourself, is keeping private keys secure. And so let's go into another one. So let's say you protect your private keys and you're doing just fine, but there's other things you have to look out for, and that's namely Ponzi schemes. And we all have seen Ponzi schemes, multi-level marketing schemes, and double your money in 90 days, that sort of thing. Well, the same problems eventually came into the blockchain space. As soon as people realized there was money involved and, Bitcoin was making a lot of money, it went all high in price. People wanted in on that action. And a lot of these Ponzi scams, unfortunately, took advantage of people doing that. I knew a lot of people here in Dallas and they got into it. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost money. So BitConnect is kind of the most infamous one, both because it was a massive cryptocurrency. It was in the top 20 of market caps in 2017 with a high of $500 per coin. The other reason that it is famous is because of that guy in the image, who became a bit of a meme. And let me actually play you a little video if I can. And let me mess with the settings really quick. New share. And I'm going to share my music as well. There we go. All right. And by the way, let me know if you can hear this. This guy.
Wow! Be connected! And let me tell you that I am actually earning around $1,400 on an everyday basis, 7 days a week. What? I am right now independently, financially independently. I am saying to so many people who said that this was going to be a con artist game, that this was going to be a scammer game. Hey, you're going to lose all your money. My wife still doesn't believe in me.
Yeah, that's about how that ended. So this became very common. This became a classic approach that a lot of crypto schemes took, which was allowing people to pile in, put in a lot of money. They saw payouts every day, and that was the insidious part about it. That's what you saw whenever someone was basically seeing in their cryptocurrency wallet, in their Bitcoin wallet, payments coming in, and they would understand that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, was secure, and they would say, "Oh, well, it's paying me out. I have the crypto in my wallet, therefore it must be a real thing." But unfortunately, of course, people were only being paid out as long as more people were paying in through the multi-level marketing scheme. And unfortunately, that as soon as the table flipped and there weren't enough people pulling money in, the people that were running the scam would pull the money out and run. And so that happened to BitConnect, and the price was hit accordingly. In Texas, actually, they were issued a cease and desist order, and that price immediately dropped from its high by 92% down to 40 cents per coin. And this was very destructive for anyone holding that cryptocurrency. And the ultimate lesson here is that just because a blockchain is open source and decentralized doesn't make it's trustworthy, because BitConnect, on the face of it, followed all the rules of blockchain. It was decentralized, it used cryptography, but because the coin was primarily used in a Ponzi scheme, which you didn't have to participate in to own BitConnect and then be affected. You could hold BitConnect as an investment and never have been a part of the Ponzi scheme, but because the price collapsed as a result of it, everyone who held BitConnect was still affected. So this is a reason to understand what is the point of this blockchain protocol or this cryptocurrency and whether you should hold it or not. So another one we can talk about, now that we've kind of gone through a lot of the, I would say, cryptocurrency scams that are out there, is the DAO hack. And the DAO hack is really interesting for developers that like the idea of smart contracts. And smart contracts are pieces of code that can run on a blockchain. In the case of Ethereum, they actually have Turing complete smart contracts. And they would write them to do, a lot of financial, basically build a lot of financial applications that can run autonomously. And the most famous of which was the DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that was used for crowdfunding on Ethereum. And it held upwards of $150 million worth of Ether, which is a cryptocurrency on Ethereum, at its peak. And the whole idea is you could use it to fund a lot of different projects on Ethereum. And it was kind of like a proof of, we're going to eat our own cat food, and we're going to show you how we can create a decentralized organization. But there were a lot of critics, or at least there were some critics in the early days, to say, there could be some security vulnerabilities. How are we checking the code? Are we testing it? Is it really that secure? Because you have to remember, this is code running on top of a blockchain. That means it's not automatically secure just because it's on a blockchain. The code itself still needs to pass muster. And unfortunately, the DAO did not. In June of 2016, a hacker used a reentrancy bug where they were able to basically recursively call a function before their state balance was changed to basically control far more funds than they actually had access to. And this allowed them to steal up to $50 million worth of Ether, which was a massive amount at the time. And it had a big impact on the entire Ethereum community. It was so bad that the Ethereum community actually did something that it's traditionally never going to do, or at least they insist they'll never do it again. And that was they initiated a hard fork, getting back to the question of someone saying if participants can change the tree. In this case, they did. They changed the tree to reverse this specific hack and patch the bugs. And this is famous because there was actually a fork where Ethereum, the main Ethereum chain, was changed and then continued onwards and continues to be the main Ethereum chain today. But there's another chain called Ethereum Classic, where a lot of participants said that we don't want to see these transactions reversed. We don't like the fact that it happened, but they believed that a blockchain had to be immutable and you couldn't do this. It would be a slippery slope. And that continues today as Ethereum Classic, which is far smaller. It has a smaller community, but it's still there. And so the real lesson that we got from this was that application code written for blockchain-based smart contracts can still have security bugs. And a lot of lessons were learned from this, and a lot of different due diligence is now done on smart contracts deployed to Ethereum and other blockchains, because it's known that as soon as you deploy it to a blockchain, it's out there. Anyone can find it, anyone can read through the code, and anyone can potentially hack it. So security by obscurity is not an option in a smart contract world. You have got to be on top of your game, and that means bug bounties, audits, and a lot of other things that we'll actually talk about later in this webinar. So that was the DAO hack, and that is, again, a very famous example of why smart contract security is a very important topic. But another one that I'm sure you've all spoken about, and I have to cover it here because it's probably the biggest reason to know crypto today as a security profession, is ransomware. And ransomware is where cryptocurrency is used to pay ransoms for your data. So starting in 2013, malware began encrypting vulnerable computers. There was some malware before that was doing this, but as soon as hackers realized that you could use Bitcoin to pay ransoms, it became very, very popular, because for the same reason that it was popular for darknet markets, which is, it's more difficult to trace, I would say, in some cases, as well as the fact that it's anyone in the world could get access to Bitcoin. Anyone can either purchase it on an exchange or get it off the street. It's a good way for hackers to get paid, and it's instantaneous, almost instantaneous, I should say. But it's perfect. It's far easier than any other payment method you could do online for cybercrime. So pretty quickly, this became the go-to way that ransomware was performed, in the way that people were requesting ransoms. And it got to the point where, you could see this one started with $300. I saw a lot that were at this amount. I worked with several people here in Dallas that got ransomware and, needed me to come in and help them buy Bitcoin and send it in order to pay their ransom. But very quickly, ransomware started to accelerate beyond just encrypting random computers and calling out small ransoms. Eventually, it got to the point where we're looking at massive, massive attacks as large IT partners like Cognizant are hit, and they had a massive attack. I don't know if they paid their ransom, but they did get a $50 million to $70 million profit loss that quarter because of so many projects that were delayed because they had the entire system stripped down and had to be rebuilt. So this is starting to have a massive impact on IT infrastructures, and it's been estimated by the FBI that over $1 billion in ransoms have been paid. And I've seen police stations that have come to me needing help with crypto ransom. I've seen governments that had gotten attacked. I mean, you can read through tons of examples of ransomware. There's a lot of good security reports out on it now. But the main takeaway from this is that hackers can now monetize security breaches by encrypting data. And Bitcoin is a good way to do that, for better or for worse. And I mean, you could definitely say for worse, but there's a caveat to that. I'll show you a little later. But the main mitigator for that, the lesson to learn, is do data backups and keep them separate from your main system. Because I know some people that have been hit that did backups, but they did not properly disconnect their backups from their main system. The virus was able to get in and encrypt the backups as well. So make sure that you've got a security professional that knows what they're doing and is able to make sure that backup is secure from some sort of attack, like a ransomware attack. And doing practices and even using existing ransomware, as in just creating a test environment and seeing how the ransomware performs, would be a good way to perform those attacks, those sort of attack scenarios, to ensure you're secure. So that was all the cyber tales that I have. There's a lot of other ones. But I would definitely, oh, actually that state of ransomware report that Chuck just posted is perfect. I read that the other day, and that was a great example of, yeah, just how prolific it is. But now let's get into cyber opportunities, because I want to talk about like, what can you, if you're listening to this now and you're a cybersecurity professional and you're interested in blockchain, you like the things I've been discussing so far, what can you do? What are the areas in blockchain that really need someone like you, and what are ways to get started? Well, a lot of the opportunities in blockchain revolve around the existing industries that have been built up, namely the financial services, the Bitcoin exchanges and cryptocurrency exchanges, the wallet services, and all the others. So cryptocurrency security is probably the biggest area you will find, because there's so much money being done in crypto. It's over several $billion in market cap now. Lots of money being poured into that industry. And so protecting private keys in that industry is critical. And so since Mt. Gox, a lot of exchanges and wallet services have made security their top priority. One good example is Coinbase. They're a US-based exchange, and they have hired a lot of security engineers, and they have started to use what's called cold storage to protect their crypto funds. And what cold storage is the idea that you should take your private keys and make sure that they're not connected to the internet in any way. Either put them on devices that are not networked, or have them disconnected from device entirely. The one example is a Trezor, which is a hardware wallet. You can see in that picture. And the idea is that the private keys are on that device. And if you want to send a transaction, what it will do is your computer will send the transaction you want to send to the device. The device will ask for a confirmation if you should sign it with your private key. And then it will then send the signed transaction back to your computer. But the private key itself never leaves the hardware device. And that's critical, because otherwise it could potentially be stolen by malware residing on your computer that is connected to the internet. And you can go so far as to actually just print out a private key on paper and put that in a safe or somewhere similar. So there's a lot of ways to protect your cryptocurrency, especially if you're going to hold it for a long time as like a long-term storage option. So this is a critical thing to understand if you're trying to protect cybersecurity, is making sure private keys are secure, and ways to do that. And it's one of the reasons that it's a great area to start in if you're trying to learn where security practices can be most helpful. Another area that's very useful, and this is where I've been hinting at why blockchain isn't always the best for cybercrime, and that is a growing practice of blockchain forensics and analytics. And that's the idea that you can follow cryptocurrency transactions that are related to crime or money laundering or anything else over time. Because one of the advantages of blockchain, for law enforcement at least, is that all of these transactions are public, are immutable, and they're not going anywhere. And you can actually track Bitcoin that has come from a theft or some sort of a criminal activity, and track where it goes afterwards, including, it could pass through multiple accounts, it could go through multiple areas, but you can always potentially track it down. And they have, criminals will try to disguise where they're going. They'll use what's called Bitcoin mixers, where they'll mix it with a bunch of other Bitcoin. But still, there are ways with forensics and machine learning even to figure out what Bitcoin might be associated with criminal activity and which one isn't. And so there are firms like Chainalysis that are actually working heavily now with government and financial institutions to identify thefts, ransom payments, and money laundering. And I actually know a guy named Arnold Spencer. He's the general counsel for CoinSource, which is a Bitcoin ATM operator here in the US. And before he was general counsel for them, he was a US federal prosecutor for money laundering. And the thing that he always said that stuck with me is he had a real big struggle tracking down money laundering with dollars, because he had to go and get a subpoena for every single bank account that was out there. And that could take a lot of time trying to figure out where the money was going. With blockchain, it's there. You can know exactly where the money has gone. And they've actually caught people years after the crime was committed, including the people and some of the people that were part of the Mt. Gox hack. They were able to catch them years after the fact, just because they were able to pay attention to where the funds were going up until they made a slip up, revealed their identity, and then they got them. So a very interesting field if you're into data science and tracking down criminal activity. I highly recommend checking out Chainalysis and their blog. It's a really good place to get started. By the way, the slides should be included at the end of this presentation, so all these links will be available. And then finally, and probably the most interesting area to get into, especially if you like breaking things, is bug bounties and audits. ever since the DAO hack, a lot of smart contract protocols, especially the ones that are going to be handling financial payments and crypto, now offer bug bounties and audits before they deploy them to the mainnet. So they'll put them on a test network, they'll let people attack them, and they'll compensate them if they manage to find certain vulnerabilities, depending on how severe it is. So there's now several security firms that are dedicated entirely to contract auditing services. I've actually done a few smart contract audits on a small scale myself, just looking for basic vulnerabilities, but there's a lot of them that are actually very, very sophisticated and get very good at their jobs. One of the most famous companies is Open Zeppelin, where they offer blockchain security products and services for developers. And they've actually created a suite of smart contracts that have been thoroughly audited and tested and kind of provide a lot of basic functionalities like wallets and tokens and ownership principles. So like, for example, in almost all projects I've done as a smart contract developer, I've used their contracts because they have so many protections already built in. So there's a lot of security that has been vastly improved in the blockchain space since that DAO hack, specifically because the stakes are so high when you're dealing with actual financial transactions. So where can you get started? Actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Where can blockchain go beyond just, cryptocurrency and where it's being used now? Due to its distributed nature, blockchain networks have a lot of potential in securing existing systems, ways that might actually be able to enhance the security of existing computer networks, something that manages supply chains, something that handles internal systems. And there's a lot that can actually be done there. A lot of use cases that are currently being explored. So a few of those here that I can discuss are, one, censorship resistant transactions and data storage. So if you need to post data that you don't want to be censored, maybe you're living in a country that doesn't have free speech, maybe you are wanting to put data out there that you can trust won't ever be removed. You don't trust Amazon S3 or some other big data provider. You want it to be always there, no matter what. That would be a good use case for a blockchain, especially something public like Ethereum. Another idea would be data integrity guarantees. Maybe you have a lot of data in your internal database, and you don't necessarily need to put it all on a blockchain, but you want to prove to someone that the data hasn't been tampered with over time. One option could be you could hash that database or a lot of the records in that database and anchor that hash, essentially post that hash onto a blockchain. And then if a third-party auditor came in, let's say they're doing like a quarterly audit, and they wanted to ask about, has the data been tampered with since we last came through? That hash can be a way to prove that it hasn't been. Another one that I personally like are immutable event logs for compliance with multiple parties. So this would be an example of having security logs, especially if you have systems that work and talk to other systems, other third-party systems, to ensure that the events will always be there and you can always go back to the source. So a good example would be like a supply chain. You want to have event logs of what happened in the supply chain and make sure that there is always a way to figure out where a package or a shipment might have gone. And this could also be used to prevent particular kinds of attacks. There was a zero-day attack several years ago against Windows that allowed an attacker to overwrite the Windows security logs, which meant that an attacker could potentially remove traces of their presence. That's where maybe a blockchain event log could come in handy. Another interesting one is privacy enhancements using zero-knowledge proofs. So kind of essentially solving the problem of how blockchain transactions can be easily tracked. The idea of using a zero-knowledge proof is to make it so that people can still transact on a blockchain, but you can't identify who they are or where they go, which would be, even though it could potentially enhance cybercrime, it could also be very important if you're a company that wants to do business on a blockchain and you don't want your competitors to see what's going on, as well as individuals that don't want to be tracked by anyone that is watching their address. So a lot of interesting work being done, especially by Zcash, which is a company, or rather a cryptocurrency working on zero-knowledge proofs in blockchain. And Ethereum is also working closely with them to use it for smart contracts. And then one other one, so self-sovereign identities. And this is actually going to get to Andrea Kim's question on voting systems. So self-sovereign identities are essentially identities that can be owned by individuals and used for sharing data and sharing information about their identity. So some of you might be familiar with the DID specification, which is a decentralized identifier specification from W3C. So it's considered a standard for decentralized identity. And what you can do is you can allow people to have private keys, just like they do in a blockchain. And they essentially control an identity, and you can issue credentials against them. So like I could, I could be issued a token for speaking at CSNP, and someone asked, have you ever spoken at CSNP? I could provide that credential as proof. And the most important thing about this is that there's no one person that controls an identity. It's an entirely open infrastructure. And you can anchor it to a blockchain to ensure that it's immutable and can't be overwritten. So I would say, I know there's been a lot of talk about voting since the USPS has filed a blockchain patent. I think one realistic way to implement a blockchain-based voting system, which I think would have to be done carefully because of, the DAO hack and the fact that it needs to be secure. But I think the way of doing it would be with self-sovereign identities where, for example, the US government or maybe even your local counties could digitally issue you a voter registration. And then using that voter registration, you could then vote in an election and only have one vote. And the biggest advantage with self-sovereign identities is that you control your data. So for example, I could go online and, I'm trying to order, let's say, wine to my house because I have nothing to do and coronavirus is going on and I just want to drink my sorrows away. So I go online and say, I would like to purchase wine. Well, it needs to make sure I'm over 21. The cool thing about self-sovereign identity is you don't even have to tell them, normally you have to show them your license, which has your birth date, your driver's license number, your address, all this information you probably don't want to share as regularly as you have to right now. But with self-sovereign identity, you wouldn't even have to tell them your birth date. You would just be able to attest to the fact that you were over 21, and that would be it. So a lot of potential in self-sovereign identity. It's a space I'm very personally interested in, and I've worked on several projects that are diving into that, including an HR management tool called 3.io. So while many of these applications have potential, one piece of warning I'll give you is that blockchain isn't always the answer. Do you really need a blockchain? Typically, I think the biggest question is, do you have several third parties that need to trust each other? If you're just talking about an internal tool, there might still be a need for blockchain if third-party trust is in the future. But a lot of the times what you're going for maybe just, maybe you just need asymmetric cryptography. Maybe you just want digital signatures for verification, but you don't need a blockchain. Or maybe you just want distributed storage or a distributed network, but that doesn't necessarily need to be a blockchain. So always make sure you have those questions in mind before you commit to a blockchain solution, because it can sometimes be more difficult than it needs to be. But I still think there's a massive amount of opportunities for blockchains out there, and I think we'll continue to see those use cases grow. So finally, how do you get started? If you're a security professional, what do you look for? How do you actually get into it? You can learn about cryptocurrency by buying Bitcoin and setting up your own wallet. You can read about how Bitcoin works. I recommend starting with the Bitcoin white paper, very short and good read. You can learn common smart contract bugs. And Open Zeppelin actually has a capture the flag challenge where you can go through a lot of the common bugs and see if you can crack them. You can participate in smart contract bug bounties. You can apply security positions offered by Coinbase, Binance, many other blockchain companies. And if you want to be involved in the Texas community, I highly recommend you join the Texas Blockchain Council by becoming a member. So that is the talk. Here are some links to follow up, and we'll be sending the slides out. But now I'm ready to answer some questions. And again, thank you all for listening, and let's get into it.
Michael, absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing this stuff. I've seen this presentation before, guys, and I still learned something. So just absolutely wonderful stuff. I think that just to comment on the last thing that you brought up, or on one of the last things you brought up, the fact that just in the past week, while Michael and I were working on this presentation, that the United States Postal Service released a patent on blockchain. It just goes to show you how quickly this field is moving. I worked on some blockchain products in the past about getting third parties to trust each other. And even from when I was working on that project in 2017 to today, the field is just completely different. And things are innovating and moving at a speed that I'd never expect. So to kind of kick things off with a question of my own, Michael, one of our members here today asked about the threat of nation states to blockchains. And I have a question that's been bugging me that I've been wanting to ask you about the possibility that crypto could endanger the international monetary exchange called SWIFT.
Yes.
And I think you could give us just a couple of minutes on that.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that's definitely, I think, I think that's definitely in the near future. It's really just about adoption at this point, because ultimately what Bitcoin and blockchains functionally do, they already do it far better than Swift, because Swift is operating on not only very old infrastructure, but typically they're more reliant on the business relationships between banks rather than the actual technology. Whereas Bitcoin and blockchain entirely eschews a business relationship and simply says, if you can trust cryptography, you can trust a payment. So, I mean, I can send Bitcoin anywhere in the world. It will show up instantaneously. It'll be confirmed in 10 to 20 minutes, maybe up to an hour if you want to be really safe. And that's already far faster than what a SWIFT payment would look like. It would take days, weeks, maybe months if it's a really complicated set of jurisdictions you're passing through. So from a technical perspective, it's a big challenge. I think adoption is going to make a big difference. And what we're already seeing is that a lot of countries that don't like SWIFT, because of the way that the US might be able to kind of use it as a diplomatic tool, countries like China and Iran and others are already looking into what a digital currency could look like for them and how that might be their alternative to a new banking system. So I think it's definitely going to continue to play a part. And other banks are playing a big role in that too. IBM WorldWire, the Ripple network and Stellar, a lot of projects, including ones that are involving banking institutions, are looking at how blockchain can be used to replace something like Swift. So yeah, we'll see that change. And some transactions are already being done using blockchain through banks. They're not always clear on which ones, but I think that's just going to grow over time because it's just a far cheaper option.
That's fantastic. Michael, you've been doing a great job on fielding your own questions. So I'm just going to let you take it from here and go ahead, man.
All right. So I saw a question on what is the difference between a smart contract developer and a blockchain developer, or is it the same? That's a good question, because I think it's a case of every smart contract developer is a blockchain developer, but not every blockchain developer is a smart contract developer. And what I mean by that is you can be writing the code. It's kind of like layers, you can be someone who writes operating system code, or you can write application code. And a blockchain developer, I would say, is writing either the operating code for a blockchain, which is like writing the code for the nodes and the protocol itself, which is kind of the base layer. Or you can write the application code on top, which is a smart contract. So a smart contract developer is just they're on a higher level. A blockchain developer, or a blockchain protocol developer would be building more of the base layer, which I would say is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult, but definitely something that's very in demand right now. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. Scott has a question. Go for it.
I think there's some more questions in the Q&A too.
I'm looking at that chat. Oh, wrong thing. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Oh, yeah. No, I've been missing out. Let's see here.
And Scott, yeah, we'll take an audio question here in just a second. I do want to get to the backlog in the Q&A.
Okay, so let me go after Bruce. Someone wants to use a blockchain to secure data storage. It would cost them money for each transaction if they use Bitcoin, correct? And how does someone get to a free blockchain that's not owned by a single entity? So here's an interesting idea, and that's kind of what gets into what's called Ethereum 2.0, the idea of creating layers of a blockchain. But what you can do is you can actually run your own network on top of a blockchain, whether it is a payment network or possibly a blockchain network of your own. It depends on what you want to do. But what you can do is you can potentially swap transactions on that network. You could do thousands of transactions per second and they could all be free. And then what you would do is like every few, whether it's every 10 minutes or every hour or every day, it depends on what you want, but you can actually anchor those transactions into the main chain. So for example, someone could send, Chuck and I could send Bitcoin back and forth all week by locking up some Bitcoins in a contract on the main chain. And then at the end of the week, we could settle by basically creating a net transaction from all these cumulative transactions. And then we would withdraw our funds from the contract on the main chain. So we can sum up thousands of transactions into one. So that's one way to reduce the transaction cost. So in the case of data storage, you would probably not want to put every data change on chain. You might only want to do it every hour or every day or every week. Okay.
Just in this break between the questions here, I am going to go ahead and launch a poll for all of our attendees here. If you do take the time to fill out the poll, I'll be very grateful. It does help us sort of figure out who our audience is and how to make these webinars better for you. We'll continue the Q&A. Let's do one more out of the Q&A box, and then we'll take Scott's question.
All right. Okay, so Jeremy Fletcher has a good one because I've heard this one before. You mentioned a 51% attack. I've heard the reality is that 34% is all that is needed to attack any distributed network. Could you talk about that? Yeah, I've heard about that because there's some local folks here in Dallas called, they're a Hashgraph that have talked a lot about that. And I think that is true, but it's not like just one attack in that case. A 34% attack is typically where you are also cutting off part of the network from the rest. So the scenario I've heard is all the Bitcoin miners in China, if China wanted, they might throw up a big wall, their firewall, and cut off those nodes from the rest of the network, which means that the remainder of the network, let's say you cut off a third, the remainder of the network is only 2/3, and so you'd only need a little more than a third, so 34%, in order to take over that network. So if you can cut off part of the network, then you could attack with less than 51% because you've essentially reduced the amount of active participants by isolating them. So that would be a way that you can initiate that sort of attack.
Fantastic. All right, Scott, let's go ahead and take you. Scott, you've got the mic. You may have to unmute.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Okay. I think I have my question written, some outline here. This presentation has been of great interest to me. I've been following many of the same developments as a web application engineer for the last 15 years. And also in my background, I've worked as a security analyst for 2 years. You mentioned the idea that if you don't control your private keys, you don't control your BTC. And it occurred to me there's an overlap here with encrypted data in general. And it comes up specifically sometimes in compliance when having to secure PHI or PII. For example, in HIPAA compliance, there are best practices associated with key management. There's complexities that come up, such as integration with DevOps, like when an employee is terminated, how do we make sure, that they cannot access the encrypted data? Do we have to change the keys? The keys cannot be stored on the same server. I noticed there is a niche in this area, especially with healthcare providers and probably any industry where compliance comes up. So that's interesting. And I was wondering, when I was a consultant, one of the challenges that I observed or was thinking about is that, with distributed applications, if there was a HIPAA security analysis on a distributed application, where we were trying to provide evidence of compliance, and the system had in its data sets PHI and PII, or PII. Do you think that people will be using public blockchain systems to interact with this type of confidential data, or will this always are private systems the correct way to utilize managing this kind of data only?
Gotcha. So that's a really good question. That gets to the heart of, I think the challenges of taking actual customer and user data and putting on a blockchain and what you're trying to get out of that. So I imagine the big use case, and this is what I've seen when I've researched it or worked with clients looking at it. The big use case for healthcare data is, how do I make sure that, my doctor can see my health records from other doctors, and how do I get it so that it's not like a big mess that it currently is, while remaining compliant? So I think with blockchains, what you would want to see is a blockchain not being the storage mechanism, but rather the transport layer in terms of authenticating data access. So what you could do is you could hash your medical data. You could show with a private key that you own it and that is your data. But in terms of the data itself, that would then be stored in either a typical database or potentially with some other distributed file solution. IPFS is a big one. It's called interplanetary file storage, where it's kind of like BitTorrent. It's a hash-based file system that can be distributed. But I think in that case, both because of the storage, the fact that storage on a blockchain is not cheap, as well as the fact that it will not be private unless you're on a private blockchain. It wouldn't make sense to use it for storing direct records, but you could link the records to where it is stored. And then that way authenticate, these are my records and I give you, this particular doctor, access to it. And that's also where a self-sovereign identity solution with DIDs would come into play, to identify that that's my data and that's where I would like to give access to someone else.
Okay. Let's see, who hasn't had one answered yet?
Oh, there's a couple. Let me go up here. If folks, okay, some Bruce, if folks quit mining Bitcoin, will all the blocks fill up and users would no longer be able to perform transactions? Yes, if mining just stopped, if like no more mining was out there, then in terms of blocks filling up, the blocks just wouldn't be created, because a miner is responsible for creating that block and then adding it to the chain. And they can only add a block by mining for that nonce. So mining is a crucial part of the network. If a lot of miners dropped off, then the difficulty would adjust for that, but there would always have to be someone mining, some group of people mining. And the way that you avoid the scenario of like everyone stops mining is you do have the incentive of getting paid in Bitcoin that is both newly generated and transaction fees. And if, for example, the transaction fees were not worth the cost of mining, then you would typically see either miners drop off and reduce the difficulty, or more people would pay transaction fees in order to get their transactions processed. So there's a market dynamic in play that ensures there's always going to be a miner willing to mine a block, unless for some reason people no longer wanted to purchase Bitcoin. But I doubt we're ever going to see that, because it's such an established market now that even if government action tried to take it down, I think there's always going to be a market that keeps it going. But good question on that, because it's a crucial part of how a blockchain works. There's other ways to do like consensus. You can use proof of stake or others, but mining is so far the most secure way to do it in a decentralized fashion.
Well, I do want to be conscious of the time. It is 10 minutes after 8. And Michael, if you would like to stay online and answer questions, and if the audience would like to stay here, Michael, it's your time. You can spend it as you like. I have no problem with it. Michael, however, if you would like to go offline, I would encourage that our audience reach out to him. His contact information is available here on the screen, so capture it while you can. And also, if you want to reach him later, you don't remember his email address, you can always contact us at dallas@csnp.org. So Michael, I'll let you take it from here, answer as many questions you like, stay as late as you like. I'll be right here too, but I am going to get a snap.
Right. That'll work. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so yeah, I'll keep going. I'm definitely I'm feeling like we're on a roll here. So a follow-up question to that data was, what about data that needs to expire, e.g. juvenile records? That's a good one, because what you can do is let's say you're hashing that data. So you have a unique hash for, let's say, juvenile record that's stored in a database. The best part about using hashing with the blockchain is that if the raw data isn't on the blockchain, it's just a hash. And so unless you see the raw data, there's no way for you to tell that hash is a juvie record or not, unless someone gives you the access to see that raw data. If you throw the raw data away because a record has been expunged, then the hash doesn't mean anything. So you can still, as long as you architect your system correctly and plan for the scenarios of data being removed, then you can definitely make sure that expired data or data you don't want to show anymore is no longer available through a blockchain system, because you don't want to necessarily store everything on a blockchain, just the amount of information needed to verify something. Okay, and then someone, Galaxy J7 Prime, which I think is possibly their phone, we'll see. But I am beginning financial fraud fintech classes. Oh, very good. I'm teaching a fintech class at UTD right now, so good to hear. And I'm lacking actual hands-on training in North Carolina. How can I get more hands-on training to be marketable? That's an interesting question. So if you are interested in blockchain fraud specifically, and you're looking for hands-on training, if you can learn how to work your way around a blockchain, and there's ways to do it. You can go through like a blockchain explorer. Let me see if I can just pull something up and drop it in the chat. But you can go through a blockchain explorer and see transactions and track them around. And Chainalysis also has a tool that you can use. So like Etherscan, I think is a good example because that's where you can look at a lot of smart contract transactions as well. So I'll pop that into the chat for you, but that's a good place. I would say that's a good place to get started. And then just doing more research to see like, okay, is anyone, just looking at transactions and figuring out what's going on here. How do they work? What's the data behind it? And there's actually a very big, I think there's a very big need for this right now because of something called DeFi, decentralized finance. And there's a lot of smart contracts on Ethereum right now that are becoming very popular for doing margin trading and arbitrage trading, a lot of other things like that. And a lot of it is just analyzing transactions and trying to figure out what's going on. So if you're looking to understand that, as well as understanding what potential fraud might be occurring. So if you're looking for hands-on experience, just getting into a blockchain explorer and trying to understand what's going on would be a great start to that. DeFi, yeah, DeFi is big. Okay, I'm gonna do all panelists, or no, all panelists and attendees. There we go. Yeah, so etherscan.io would be the website to just check out and start scrolling through transactions and figuring it out. Which accredited education platforms are out there for blockchain and crypto, and which would you recommend? That's a tough one because it's a very new field. And from what I can find, there's not a lot out there that gives you the information you really need to know what's going on. Just because I think the people that really know what's going on are the people that are like actively developing, and it's very difficult to both actively develop on blockchain platforms and teach. But there are resources out there that I can recommend. If you're looking at understanding it from just a financial perspective, especially if you're looking to understand how it works as a asset class, I highly recommend Crypto Assets by Chris Bernicki and Jack Tatar. They tell you a lot about how to understand it as an investment. So if you're interested in the investment and financial side, that's a good place to start. If you're looking more from a security perspective, that Ethernaut challenge that I have in, I put it in the slides, but let me send a link in the chat as well. This I think is a great learning resource because it's hands-on to understand how to use, how smart contract security works, just smart contract security in that case. And if you're looking for more hands-on, like, the closest thing to accredited, I would say out there is something called B9 Academy. They offer a lot of good courses that are paid, but they'll give you a certification and they'll issue it on a blockchain. So it's there for good. And they actually have, they have a lot of smart contract courses. And I think they also have an auditing course out there as well now. So that would be a more, I would say, accredited way to get started. And if you're doing fintech and you want to attend UT Dallas, then you can take the class I'm lecturing on right now, which is a financial technology course. The department, I'll add a link to that as well for the department that I'm working for, which is the Financial Technology and Analytics Department at UTD. So I'll throw that in the chat as well, because that's where we're currently working. And if you're looking to do a degree, I highly recommend UT Dallas for this particular program. I've been working with them for a long time. Even when I was a student, I was TAing for this program. I was in the computer science department in the engineering school, and this is in the business school. And I find myself over there more than I was in the computer science department because they were still trying to figure out how to set up a blockchain course and maybe talk about it more in other classes. And the fintech program was already issuing a course for blockchain. So they were actually ahead of the computer science department in a way, which is a little embarrassing as a computer scientist myself, but I would definitely highly recommend the finance program there. If you are looking to spend the money on a degree, if you're just looking to get that hands-on experience, the first couple of links I sent will definitely get you there. Let's see. There's some other questions that I might have missed. How about the energy efficiency and the cost of confirming new transactions over time, which seem to be growing exponentially? So that's a good question. And energy efficiency, I think, is a misunderstood discussion in blockchain, especially for mining, because you see they tell you things like it takes, all of the electricity currently used to run Denmark, the same equivalent to run the Bitcoin network. And the takeaway a lot of people have from that is that Bitcoin is inefficient. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily true in terms of transactions. Confirming transactions is not that computationally intensive. The computationally intensive part is calculating the nonce, and that is inefficient by design because it shouldn't be easy to calculate a nonce. It should be hard so that someone trying to attack the network would have a lot of difficulty. There are still efficiency concerns with how many transactions you can put into a block, how many you can confirm. That is a concern, and there are a lot of ways to scale it. What was it called? I'm trying to remember. The SegWit upgrade was a big one for Bitcoin that reduced the size of transactions in these blocks. There are a lot of improvements to the protocol being made on Ethereum, such as sharding. Same thing as database sharding, which is creating different blockchain networks. So not every transaction has to go through every node, as well as creating layer 2 solutions, which are networks, like I said before, where you can do a lot of transactions and then just have like a net transaction that's then uploaded to the blockchain. And there's other versions of blockchains like Hedera Hashgraph that are doing like a DAG, a directed acyclical graph approach, that are also different ways to do it that are a bit more efficient. But I think the layer 2 solutions are going to have the most benefit, because ultimately a blockchain is never going to be as efficient as a centralized database, because it's just distributed system. And the more distributed it is, the more secure it is, which is the point. So if you want scale while working with a blockchain, a layer 2 solution makes the most sense, because then you can customize the amount of scalability you need and then anchor it into a blockchain as much as you think is necessary.
So Michael, one of our audience members has his hand up. Ray Diggs, did you want to take the mic for a second? And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, never mind.
All right, let me see. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm willing to do a couple more if y'all are. Great questions though. Let's see. Oh wait, I keep looking in the wrong place. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. If I want to create my own blockchain, do I have to create new blocks via mining like Bitcoin, or is there another way that has less overhead? Yes, that's a great question. Yes. So first of all, you can run a blockchain on your own computer easily. And there are frameworks that do this for you as a developer for you to do testing. One's called the Ganache, which is part of the Truffle framework for Ethereum. But you can also run your own blockchain network just to test. And what you do is you configure a new block, the genesis block of your blockchain, and that defines the rules for how that blockchain runs. And what you can do is you can just set it up as, set up a node and then let other people add nodes and just run it that way. And typically what a private blockchain or permission blockchains that corporations use that I've worked on, they basically do it by membership criteria. It's a invite-only blockchain, and the nodes that are running in that blockchain are known actors, and they're considered trustworthy. And this is called a proof of authority chain. And that's how a lot of permission blockchains runs, as well as some blockchains that are like side chains to Ethereum. So someone will create a proof of authority network on top of Ethereum so that transactions can be run with a lot less overhead. And then just, a net result is added to Ethereum. And there's a way to move funds between the Ethereum main chain and a side chain. And a lot of research is put into that. So that's where you can definitely reduce a lot of your overhead with the blockchain. You don't have to do mining for every transaction. The only transactions that need to be done with mining are the ones that have to be secure and completely immutable. If you're doing thousands of transactions with your use case, that's not necessary, especially if you also don't want that data to be shared with everyone. So there's lots of reasons to create your own blockchain, but typically you would anchor it into a public chain so it still has a certain immutability guarantees and security. It's kind of like creating an intranet and then hooking it into the internet. It's a very similar principle of having your own environment, but still being able to communicate with the outside world in a trustless way. All right. And anything I missed? One from an anonymous attendee. We regulate the lawyers, and they were required to keep client funds in trust accounts till they provide service. So if the lawyer accepts retainer through a crypto, then what are some of the risks to the client and also to the lawyer? Okay, so this is kind of getting to what if you use a smart contract or a blockchain for custody, for fund custody. I would say if you're using a trust account on a blockchain, you have a lot more transparency because everyone can see what the funds are. You have verifiable contract rules. Your biggest risk, I would say there's two risks that you then run. You run one, code bugs. If you're using a smart contract that hasn't been well audited or isn't well coded, then you run the risk of a bug occurring. But I would say if you're using a trusted platform that's gone through the rigors of code audits and bug bounties, then you're probably safe, at least safer than you would be with the alternative. And then second would be private keys. As long as if you lose your private keys, then that's a problem. And that's still, I think, a big area of research on how we ensure that individuals can protect their private keys, because people already have problems just remembering passwords that are secure. I've had clients that will take set up a crypto wallet on their phone, and then they'll get a new phone, and then they'll be surprised when they look on it and they say, I don't see where's my crypto? It's not on there anymore, because they're used to the idea of a phone automatically migrating over, and a private key might not get picked up. And then, they might be lost. They already gave away their old phone, or they wiped it, and then they're really in trouble. So I think private key management and just educating users is one of the biggest challenges in blockchain. I think it's a crucial one to create a secure internet, even without blockchain. There's a lot of other reasons that we should be encouraging a better use of private key storage, or at the very least, more ways for users to be responsible for their own security to a certain extent. Because if they control their keys or their security to an extent that they can actually, secure themselves, no matter who that party is, they can go to different third parties and identify themselves all in the same way. So that's where you can actually create more interoperable identity and trust systems, rather than, using your Google account or your Facebook account to authenticate yourself. That runs risks of trusting a single party. And we saw that with Twitter, where Twitter got hacked. And a lot of people, Obama, Musk, all of these big people that have a lot of influence, were then asking for Bitcoin payments because one 17-year-old kid hacked the system. That's a problem. And that would never have occurred if you had something decentralized using private keys on an individual basis, because there would have been no honeypot to go after or no system to compromise. They would have had to go after each individual account holder to get their key and to actually pretend to be that person. So that's a critical part of the internet infrastructure. I think blockchain and just, decentralized identifiers in general are very uniquely positioned to solve. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest places we'll see better security as a result. But it will take time, and it'll take education.
So Michael, I want to make sure that Emma gets her question answered, because she's posted in both the chat and the Q&A. So Emma asks, are there standard smart contracts around performance improvement for energy payments, or would we need to develop those ourselves?
Okay. So I think there are projects doing energy payments in terms of, by energy payment, I assume you mean electricity, like paying for your electric bill, that sort of thing. If
Emma,
that's,
would you like the mic? Would you like to? We'll go ahead and allow her to talk. See if Emma's at the thing. You may have to unmute your microphone, Emma. But
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking more in the IoT space and trying to merge blockchain distributed ledger into IoT use cases. And one of the things is for property that they want to split. If they're going to put in IoT for buildings to make the buildings more efficient, they want to split the benefit of that smartly. So you look at how much you've reduced your energy bill and split the benefit between the people who've done the IoT and the owner of the building. So it was really how to construct that. And it sounds like there are people way smarter than me already working on those kind of problems, and they have at least a basis for creating those kind of contracts. Or is it a case of just starting from scratch and working it out ourselves and going to Ethereum and creating our own one from scratch?
Gotcha. I think so. Yeah, that makes sense. So there are projects working on the idea of IoT devices for energy payments. Grid Plus comes to mind. They're actually based here in Texas, and I'll add a link in. So they're a good example, but I would say your idea is like there's a lot of work still to be done in the space. It's by no means a solved problem. And so in terms of what code is out there, The Grid Plus team has a GitHub, so you could certainly go through and look at some of their code and get some ideas on how you can use those smart contracts. And then another place that I would recommend you look, and this has to do with the way OpenZeppelin is working. They have contracts that have kind of created like a defined template. And what you would do is, like, for example, you might know you have to create a wallet for your users. And so there's probably going to be some custom software development for that use case you're describing, but the wallet code, for example, has already been written in OpenZeppelin. You can go through there and find some examples. If you need tokens to perform the payments, those have already been written. There are several standards around smart contract tokens that the Ethereum community follows, which is nice because it means any wallet software that you want to use with your platform will be compatible. So there's a lot of, I would say, not all the code is written, but a lot of the base code is written for a use case like what you're describing. So you wouldn't have to necessarily start from scratch, but you might have to build on top of what's already there.
Awesome. Well, Michael, that brings us to 8:30, and that is one of the most active Q&As that I've seen at our webinar. I knew this would be a hit, man. I am so glad that you came out to CSNP and you shared your expertise with us. This has been a fantastic experience for me. I've really enjoyed hosting you as a speaker. I really hope that you'll consider coming back.
Absolutely. No, this was great. I love the Q&A. I've been doing a lot of webinars recently, and I think this was definitely the most active in terms of the questions. I think I'm used to like having a blockchain audience, so having a lot of people that were like both interested in the space and had a lot of like interesting questions around it. This was really good. Actually, there was a few questions that I'm like wanting to kind of learn a little, like I want to dig into them more. So yeah, no, this was great.
Well,
thank you everyone for the questions.
So grab a screenshot of them real quick, and then maybe you can do that. Just before we hang up here, guys, I do want to take an opportunity to promote our next Wednesday webinar with Eric Evans, Defining Your Path to a Cloud Security Career. I am a cloud security engineer, and Eric and I were actually colleagues for a while. I can attest to his expertise in this area. If you are looking to get into cloud and cyber, please join us next week. He's got a lot to share, and he's actually a really smart guy too. So with all that, Michael, thanks again for coming out. Thank you again for answering the questions. To all of our members, volunteers, and attendees, thank you guys for coming out tonight. If there's ever anything that CSNP can do for you, email us. You can reach me, the Dallas chapter president, at dallas@csnp.org. If you want to share your time, passion, and initiative with us, you can always volunteer with us at csnp.org/volunteers. With that, good night, good luck, and Michael, see you around.
Good night, Chuck, and good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.